Hello, and thank you for joining me to have a closer look at this lovely brand new REBOR Stegosaurus. This is the mountain variant. It's the only one I have, regrettably. I haven't got the space or the finances for all three. You can actually get all three at a slightly discounted price from Everything Dinosaur. They're offering them as a bundle if you so wish. And whilst they're all the same base sculpt, there is a bit of flexibility in the neck and the tail, which I'll come to later, which offers you some more posing options. I didn't realise quite how many Stegosaurid figures I had in my collection. I've got quite a few here. This is definitely the most high quality and detailed one I have. And I'm very impressed with it and I'm very happy with this figure. I'm just going to have a quick look at the pose first of all. As you can see, it's caught sort of mid-step. Their head's very up and alert looking. And it's got that lovely straight tail out behind it with the laterally facing spikes. Really quite dynamic, despite it being quite a big, heavy interpretation of Stegosaurus. There has been a lot of revision to the anatomy of Stegosaurus armatus recently following the discovery of Sophie. If you ever get a chance to go to the London Museum of Natural History, I highly recommend going into the hallway to see Sophie the Stegosaurus. As far as I'm aware, she's still in the sort of space bit. It's a fascinating mount, very dynamic. Shows that Stegosaurus armatus had a sort of longer neck and longer forelimbs than is commonly depicted. This, however, to me more closely resembles Stegosaurus stenops, and I'm quite happy to take it as that species instead of armatus. It's actually very good to the anatomy of a skeletal I found of Stegosaurus stenops online, albeit one from 2001. A lot of things have changed with dinosaurs in the past few years, and certainly in the time that I've been collecting and in my lifetime when I've loved dinosaurs, basically my whole life, there's an awful lot of revisionism gone on. So, I was incorrect in my earlier assertion that this is the only herbivore that REBOR have done that isn't either dead or a baby, because of course they did their Ankylosaurus, which came in 3 different varieties. This is actually the 3rd Stegosaurus figure. They did one of the limited edition hatchling Stegosaurus figures, which was called Clover, and they also did this juvenile one, which actually more closely resembles the mountain variant of this latest Stegosaurus. And although it doesn't match up scale-wise, it'll certainly look nice displayed next to the mountain variant of this figure. I chose the mountain variant because red and green interpretations of Stegosaurus are 10 a penny, and I wanted something a bit different. However, let's get on to the detail of this figure. I'm going to start with the head. As you can see, there is a lot of detail on this head. I'll just get a focus on the eye there. You can see it's picked out in gold, as most REBOR figures are. Beautifully painted, tiny little black pupil there. And the head is only about the size of the end of my index finger. So although this is quite a large figure, you can see how tiny the head is. It's a really well proportioned figure, really. It's perhaps a little bit shrink wrapped. I'm not going to worry too much about that. It's quite fleshy around the nostrils. And it's a good shape in all dimensions. It's a correct shape. They have chosen to pick out the dermal armour in the throat in a gloss wash. It's spilled over slightly on the tiny little face here, but again, I'm not going to worry too much about that. Beautifully painted beak. They have also chosen to gloss wash the spines on the back, which really makes them stand out against the more matte shades of the body, but I'll come on to that a little later. As you can see from the front, it's a lovely looking Stegosaurus figure. Really cute little face there. Very broad across the hips, which is correct, and the plates down the back are very, very close together, which is as per modern interpretations of Stegosaurus, rather than them being further apart, more lateral. And a really nice touch by REBOR here is that they've made these all irregular sizes and slightly irregular shapes as well. Again, if you ever get a chance to see Sophie, you'll see that her plates are very odd. So this is a nice touch. And I like the way they've put a sort of weathered look. I mean, the plates were covered in keratin. If you look at the closest modern thing I can come across is a rhinoceros, and it has a horn which is made of keratin, and when you look at photographs of them online, they're quite gnarly and weathered looking, at least up to about a third up. So this is quite nice, looks quite organic. The other thing about the way they've sculpted these plates is they're quite broad at the base and in the middle, and then become narrower further up, rather than being one set width all the way up, as they often are in Stegosaurus figures. And that really makes them look organic and alive too. It's a really nice touch. You see a tiny little ear hole sculpted there on the other side of the face. Really is very evenly painted, very nicely painted. See the muscles down the neck. And although the neck and head are a softer material and the plates are therefore a softer material too, it's fused onto the body and the seam's barely visible there. The lovely pebbly texture that REBOR apply to the figures sort of helps to blend that in. But as you can see, the scales are all irregular sizes, which is nice. And they flow nicely across the body as well and give it a great sense of movement. Just make out the shoulder blade there and a few ribs. This lovely big skin hanging under the gut here. They've put some sort of overlapping scutes just down the forelimbs and some down the rear limbs as well there. You can just see, which is an interesting artistic choice. Kind of recalls the Ceratosaurus figure, Savage, which I know had overlapping scutes and was a little bit contentious at the time because Ceratosaurus had spines all the way down the back. But no, I'm not going to worry too much about this. You can see the folds and wrinkles sculpted beautifully along the knees there. Lovely big fat gut. Beautifully done. All the regular scales there. Nicely sculpted feet with detail on the undersides. The correct number of toes, although the outer nails are painted, which again is a little bit contentious with archosaurs, but I've heard that question too, so I'm not going to worry too much about that. As you can see, it's not too overly muscled. You haven't got the sort of superhero type look that you frequently get with dinosaur figures. Got quite bulgy muscles down the calf here. There's a little cloacal vent there so we can go to the toilet. Good thick big muscles at the base of the tail. It maybe would have been a little thicker a bit further down. That's a very minor detail. Getting on to the flexibility aspect, because obviously the neck's a sort of oval in cross section, you only really get a little bit of lateral movement. And I think REBOR said themselves that really they put the wires in, really trying to deter bootleggers. A lot of companies are suffering from, bootleggers selling identical, in some cases, copies to their own figures for far cheaper. I definitely recommend trying to get the original figures if you ever can. The tail is packaged as a separate component. As you can see, it fits quite firmly. It can only fit in one way. As you can see, the two components of the tail there, it'll only go in one way. You can't do anything daft like stick it in upside down or anything like that. It's not going to work. There we go. And again, because of the texture of the scales, that seam blends quite nicely. It might be worth wedging something in there to keep the tail up over time, because it might just sort of drop a little and expose that seam a little in time. It's amazing how with this material, when it's so soft, that they've managed to really get a sense of the sharpness of these spikes on the end of the tail. And they're posteriorly deflected and they're also laterally positioned, these spikes as well, which is correct. I love the colour choices they've made here. And this really gives you a sense of the Rocky Mountains terrain that this particular variety of the figure was supposed to live in. Lovely rocky colour to the plates, and this gorgeous sort of chocolatey, russety brown with the paler, almost pinky kind of spots going on there, and the paler underside, the counter shading. It's a really very, very nice touch. And of course with the higher end figures, they often produce these lovely bases as well. So because I've gone for the mountain variation, I've got a slightly damp looking, mossy, rocky, rooty kind of base. There's no specific footprints, but it's quite obvious the way the Stegosaurus fits on this base. I haven't seen any pictures to suggest as much, but if you get the forest variant of this figure, wrong way around there, I suspect it'll probably look quite nice displayed next to the base of REBOR's Savage Ceratosaurus, who came out in 2015. This is one of the finest bases I've ever seen, and I'm pretty sure the mountain variant of the Stegosaurus, I don't think it interlocks. It'd be nice if somebody else does a review of perhaps the forest version to give a better idea of what is possible with these. But I mean, you can always put your mountain variant of Stegosaurus on this base if you so wish, as indeed you can place the Ceratosaurus on the mountain variant's base. There's a certain amount of interchangeability there. They're not set in stone. You do what you like with them. Now, as you can see, the Ceratosaurus is a bit of a different style to the Stegosaurus. This one was created quite early on in REBOR's inception. So it was obviously sculpted by hand. And I know the choice of putting these sort of overlapping scutes down the back was a very contentious issue at the time, because Ceratosaurus actually had little osteoderms all the way down the back rather than sort of overlapping scoots. But it's a beautifully designed figure, beautifully sculpted. Whoever sculpted that was very talented. But as you can see, these modern ones, the newer figures by REBOR, have got far finer detail. I think they're digitally sculpted. So the company really has evolved as well. So looking at some of these other figures, sadly I don't have the new Safari Limited figure. I have got this old Bullyland figure, which has got a lot of character. It is desperately inaccurate. There are so many issues with this figure, I don't even know where to start with it, but it's such a nice figure anyway. I have also the Papo Stegosaurus. And whilst Papo figures tend to be very detailed, the Stegosaurus is perhaps one of the less detailed figures, and they've recently released a colour variant of this figure, which would probably match quite nicely with this mountain variant of REBOR Stegosaurus. But really, the REBOR one is far more detailed, far nicer figure, far higher quality. To be honest, it's one of the highest quality figures I've got in my collection, and I'm absolutely over the moon with it. So, Everything Dinosaur did very well to get this to me, because it came out on the 24th of December, and they got to me by the 28th, which is remarkable with the Christmas post. Very much worthwhile picking up if you're a dinosaur toy collector. Very, very pleased with it. And you can check Everything Dinosaur out on Pinterest, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, and they also do a very informative blog. I know there's a lot more REBOR figures coming out next year, and there's a lot more dinosaur figures coming out next year. So I look forward to having a look to see what comes out next and sharing it with you, and hopefully I'll see you then.